Examine a range of ethical dilemmas in order to highlight strengths and weaknesses of different ethical schools. The first school that we can look at, it's a broad school, and it's called consequentialism. This is a general framework for ethics, and it says that what is important about action, what it is that we use to evaluate good or bad, is the consequences of our action. So if what we do leads to good, then the action itself was good. One kind of consequentialism, there are many, but the most famous kind of consequentialism says the consequences that really matter is happiness. It's called utilitarianism because human utility, they claim, is captured in this concept of happiness. What humans ultimately want is happiness. And so if you commit an action and you perform the action and it leads to the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest amount of people, then what you've done is morally good. Of course, if you have two options and you take the option that does not lead to the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest amount of people, then you have not done the morally upstanding thing. A second school of thought for ethics is deontology. Deontology says consequences are not important. We don't look at consequences. We look at the very act itself. So we make rules for which kind of acts are permissible or not. And if you stick to those rules and you commit certain acts and don't commit certain acts, then you've done the right thing. Here we're looking at Kant, Immanuel Kant. His rule is fairly straightforward. Never treat others as a means. Always treat others as an end in themselves. Don't use people. Don't use them for your ends. Don't use them for someone else's ends, but treat them as something or someone who have their own ends and their own idea of the life they want to live, and respect that. Another way to say this is human dignity. Deontology would also include, for example, very many religious perspectives, because the religious perspectives provide a list of rules, and what's important is don't break the rules. So one religion may say don't murder, and it doesn't say don't murder unless, right? There's no thought of the consequence of the action. It simply says this action is prohibited. If you agree that this action is prohibited and you don't commit this action, you've done good. The last kind of ethic framework is virtue ethics. This is very different to the other two. This comes from Aristotle. And it says, act as a virtuous person would act. So Genet's point once again raises its head. What if one culture has ideas of virtues very different from another culture? No problem, Aristotle says. A virtue is actually the middle ground between two vices. The classic example of this is you should be brave, sure, but if you're too brave, you're going to do something that's not very, very good. Let's say you're in an army, you're lined up with your fellow soldiers. If you're too brave and you go running up at the enemy and you leave your battalion behind, this is not a good thing to do. If you're not brave enough and you're a coward and you hide away, also not good. So somewhere in the middle of these two extremes, one of too much, one of too little, you find a virtue, and if you always take the virtuous path, you end up being a good person. So these are the three schools of thought: utilitarianism, Kantian ethics, and Aristotelian ethics. Does anyone know the trolley problem? The trolley problem represents something that philosophical ethics does all the time, or moral philosophers, as we also call ourselves. We come up with these crazy hypothetical situations that are very unlikely to obtain in the real world, and then we throw our theories at them and see if they yield anything useful or not. It's also a way to test our intuitions, to see if our intuitions are guiding us into a strange direction or not. And one of the reasons I've chosen to use the trolley problem is because it's accessible and also it's not too personal. So it's something that we can all comment on and discuss without, getting into any perhaps controversial terrain. The trolley problem is indeed as such. There's a trolley, it's on a track, it's going to a bunch of people. You can intervene and then take it onto another track, and in this case, I've said, then it'll just annihilate one person. If you do nothing, it annihilates 4 people. So the question is, do you flip the switch? If you do nothing, 4 people get massacred. If you flip the switch, than one person does. And my next slide is this one. So I've changed it from, 4 anonymous persons and 1 anonymous person to 4 persons, 2 persons, or 2 babies. And all of a sudden, it's not just a numbers game, as very well pointed out by the comments thus far. And so just to put in a good word for utilitarianism, I have simplified what utilitarianism says, because this is not the objective on define utilitarianism. So I've summarized it, but the idea is you look at the consequences, long-term, short-term, you see what happiness can emerge. So maybe the 4 people have no connection to society and no one would mourn them. And there would be very little unhappiness if those 4 die. And maybe the 2 babies, one is the Dalai Lama, and there's going to be billions of people mourning if that baby doesn't make it. And you have to take that into account. And then you have 1 billion people versus 0. So you have to look at very many consequences here, not simply 4 versus 2. There are families connected. There are other people who will be affected by these people's deaths or not. And we should take all of this seriously. Kimberly, of course, we're talking about utilitarianism and virtue ethics. I wonder, is there a Kantian solution to the trolley problem? No. So what Joseph was discussing earlier, the intention to try to stop what's going on. For Kant, intention is what counts when you're evaluating moral action. And so Kant would say the best thing here is that you don't act, because then your intention is not to intentionally kill someone, which you would do by flipping the switch. It seems to be a little slippery of the answer, right? Because, letting die and killing, there's a distinction, but in this case, it seems to be a little, I don't know, convenient to say that by doing nothing, I'm not responsible. But the moment I actually engage the switch, I take action, I gain responsibility. That is one way that Kant would answer that. Killing some people to save others is at the same time using some as a means to an end which serves someone else, which Kant is against. So there's a second reason for not doing this. Joseph, not a fan of Kantianism. And Janae says it's a cop-out. Yeah, once again, this is a hypothetical scenario. It is exaggerated. It is there to sort of bring the points at the center of these theories get emerged when you exaggerate the situations. We will get to 2 real life case scenarios, and then throughout this course, of course, real life scenarios are what we have in mind. So thank you. So far, great discussion. I'm enjoying it very much. So here, would you track A, B, or C? What's the difference? There's babies now. And then I went further and I said 4 innocents, or at least 1 loved one, or 3 murderers and a baby, right? The calculations get a bit complex. How do you weigh up the happiness of a murderer versus the happiness of a baby? Is a baby 0.4 and a murderer is 0.1? It's a bit weird. And it sounds very dodgy to start assigning these numbers to people's happiness values. So let's look at something a bit more real life for now. So a company can use more expensive eco-friendly resources, but they will have to fire some employees, or non-eco-friendly resources and retain employees. This happens all the time, right? This is not a far-fetched example. This is the kind of thing we have to think of all the time. What does a utilitarian say? What does a Kantian say? What does Aristotle say? We can also open this up to 3rd or 4th options. So I've just sketched the scenario, but you can say, there is a 3rd or 4th option here, because this is the real world. And if you are the manager of this company, then you can take an action. And what action do we here take? So the first question about the utilitarian is, how far into the future are we looking when we think of consequence, right? Because the immediate consequence of firing some employees could be that they may not have social security, depending on in which country they live. They may be the sole breadwinners of their families, and you will be doing immediate, pretty serious harm to families, individuals, etc., etc. How non-eco-friendly are these? Is this use of resources, right? Is this likely to result in direct deaths, or is it just simply going to add another 1/1,000,000,000% of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, which by itself is not such a bad thing, but it contributes to the larger problem of environmental degradation? can we guarantee that we can't in 5 years undo the damage that we do today to the environment, and then it's worth to retain the jobs and do the pollution, but pump some more money into R&D, research and development, so that in 5 years we can, I don't know, invent some, fantastic machine to scrub the atmosphere of carbon. These are all things we have to think through, and this is simply to show us the kind of calculus that happens in a utilitarian summary of a situation. There's a lot to think about, and you have to identify the relevant stakeholders and then work it through and see what happens. So at Kantian, they have a very specific rule that they follow. I'll summarize it in just 1 minute. A deontologist, which is the larger category of which Kantianism is one instance, yes, they follow the rules, but they have ways of generating rules. It's not simply I'm a rule follower as such, right? I follow certain rules, of course, and according to certain values, I follow certain rules. So the Kantian way of generating this rule is very smart, in fact. Kant decides we need to use nothing but reason to come up with an ethical framework. And he says, okay, reason, this is what makes humans, what sets us apart, he says, from other beings. It's what gives us dignity. It's what gives us our personhood, our ability to reason, to judge for ourselves what is the good life, to make these choices, to be autonomous in this sense. So he puts reason in the center. And he says, okay, so any rule that you cannot universalize cannot be a moral action. And what I mean is, if we say taking the rule, do not lie, in order to lie successfully, your interlocutor must be expecting the truth and not receiving the truth, and that's a lie. If I tell you a joke, I'm not lying to you, even what I say is false, even if what I say is false, because you're not expecting the truth. When I pick up a book of literature, it's not full of lies, it's literature. It's a different category because I don't expect the truth. If I do lie, it means I want everyone always to lie. If everyone is always lying, no one expects the truth, therefore you cannot lie. So logic or reason here does not allow us to lie, because then we do away with the possibility of lying. And there he says, fine. So the rule here is act in such a way that you can will the principle of your action to become a universal rule. The same goes for theft. I can steal from you if there's the presupposition of private property that is not mine. But if I steal from you, then I want everyone to always steal. If I want everyone always to steal, I do not have the presupposition of private property. Therefore, don't steal. So this is how he generates his rule. It has, of course, deep criticisms, but it's not arbitrary. So Kant would respond to this and say that we don't have to play out the consequences and hypothesize the future. He was very scared of consequentialist type of thought because he exactly says, what about the consequences of an action that you could not have predicted? You're still responsible for that. That seems unfair. What if I just throw a coin out the window, but that in fact derails a train and I couldn't have known that, and now I'm responsible for derailing a train? So he says, okay, no consequence. Let's just do a logical analysis. If I lie, then according to this rule, I'm committing a contradiction, a logical contradiction. I mean, yes, the consequences are kind of what shows us this contradiction, but you can also just think about the concept of lying. And the concept itself reveals to you that if you lie and you want people to lie, then you cannot lie. Contradiction in terms, you've acted unreasonably in the strictest sense of the word. And therefore you try to undermine your own position by lying. And he says, then you take out your own foundation, you don't respect your own autonomy. For him, autonomy is key. We get this through reason, therefore don't lie. So it's a fine line. The one concerns conceptual analyses, and the one concerns playing it out in the world or simulating it in the world and seeing where it goes.